Hey, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us this evening. It's a little bit dark here in London, but hopefully you can see bright skies and sunshine, maybe even where you are. If not, never mind, you're probably in the UK or even in London as I am. My name's Darling, and I'm in a very fortunate position. Not only am I in North London, but I'm also chairman of 3 great groups in the BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. The groups are all London groups. They are London North, London Central, and now also London South. Loads of great people, great communities of IT expertise, and good places to meet. Of course, a lot of the time we're doing webinars like this one, but we also meet when we can at the London headquarters in Moorgate, in the Moorgate area of central London. Hopefully you've been there. If not, hope to see you there before long. Along with me this evening, along with me here this evening are my colleague David Grundy, who is the Secretary of London Central Branch, and also I've got Daniel Toms, who is the Chair of the Great West Yorkshire Branch of the BCS. So welcome people from those branches and from BCS overall, and even if you're not in BCS, hopefully you'll join us soon. But of course, the main focus for this evening is on Taylor, our pragmatic speaker for our subject tonight. Now, Paul has many hats. I've only got one here, but Paul has many hats. He's an author, he's a speaker, he's a consultant. His skill sets include project management, being a director, an advisory board member at ISAM, the Summit for Asset Management, and others. He is indeed well placed to give us 11 pragmatic tips for implementing new emerging technology. So, I'm going to hand over to Paul in just a minute, but for you, what I'd say is get those questions ready, get those comments ready, put them into the chat or the question box, and we will be looking at them, passing them to Paul for him to answer them for you. And the person who will be doing that in particular is Dan. So Dan, David, Paul, welcome to you, welcome, and over to you, Paul, for your great talk.
Oh, that's great. Thank you very much. Just checking, you can all see the slides on the screen. Is that all still sharing correctly? Perfect. Yeah. And thank you for a very kind introduction. I must admit, I wish I had you as my PR agent. All those nice, kind words. Anyway, so let's get cracking. So there's a slide there, obviously an open slide. So as just mentioned, there's 11 pragmatic tricks for implementing emerging technology. There's a nice picture of me in the right-hand corner. That was, as you can probably tell from the camera, that was taken many years ago. So let's go through it. So a lot of the content on this is actually based from a book, as you can see in the right-hand corner there, which is mainly around financial services technology, emerging technology. But a lot of the concepts are the same. So you can apply them to obviously fintech. I work for some educational firms, so we've applied it to educational tech or ed tech, and you can apply it to anything else. So let's moving on. So a little bit of background there. I think as I don't want to meander on that, we've covered that already. So we'll just move on to the presentation proper. So there's, well, I think we've got 90 minutes for this, and my speak will probably last 50, maybe 65 minutes, just over the hour, I guess. As we mentioned earlier, please post any questions in the box. I can't actually see the box for some bizarre reason. Never really understood this Zoom stuff. So my colleagues on the BCS will pick those questions up and throw them over to you to answer. So as you mentioned, first of all, I'll probably talk about what an emerging technology trend is, or what an emerging technology is. This is an area of massive debate at the moment, especially as technology moves so quickly. Something that's emerging becomes emerged very quickly. Then we'll run through some examples of the different emerging technologies, and that then should lead into part 3, which is the main crux of the presentation, is the sort of successful tips for implementing this technology, and there's actually 11 of them. And then last but not least, we'll just do a final wrap up and conclusions. So if we talk about what is an emerging technology, and if we just maybe do a sort of step back a bit, You know, and I think for those of a certain age, and I think some of us are a certain age, like the wrong side of 40 at least, you know, technology has driven society. You know, over the last couple of years, social media has driven society. You know, even going back years ago, you know, cars and transport has driven society. But also, society has actually helped the drive of technology. You know, people use technology for a need. You know, using social media is quite a good example. You know, social media has given people the ability to keep in touch with friends, keep in touch with old school friends, rekindle relationships with old girlfriends and what have you. And it's almost like a two-way type stream. And I mean, one of the things to mention also is interesting how technology itself has actually has evolved. For those looking back at that sort of the top of the grid there, you got to 1970. For those who remember, the technology at the time was really sort of like sort of really scientific stuff. People locked in rooms, doing you know, like massive computers, and I don't mean massive in processing powers. I mean in the size of a small football stadium. Some of these computers were. And it's really prehistoric. And then when technology sort of moved on to 1971 to 95, technology was still very much, I wouldn't say front line. In a lot of industries, it was still sort of like enabling the industries. And most of the focus was on things around automation. You know, you had things like payroll was automated, accounts was automated, record keeping was automated, you know, credit card payments were automated. So it was very functional and automated, but it was still very much sort of like siloed. And in between sort of like 95 to 2005, the technology, I called it going online, but you know, that's a bit cheesy. But you know, suddenly technology sort of became a bit more mainstream. So, you know, you had things like early internet doing that. You had Sky TV, interactive TV, and many things like that. So you had a technology was coming online. But now, really from 2005 onwards, going forward, technology is being led by the client or the user or at the moment. So effectively, you know, technology is actually now being led by us. You know, social media, online banking. You know, and today I booked my fourth COVID jab, and that was all done online. So it's a very, very much now. You know, it's all part of the normal way of working. So again, just to sort of like focus on this a bit more, what is an emerging technology? So again, just to reiterate those points again, you know, there's three main areas just to sort of think about before we come up with a definition. The first one is there are lots of new technologies. You know, as we mentioned earlier, newer technologies emerging all the time. I mean, I've been working in technology since the 80s, 30 something years, actually, probably need to get on to 40 years now. You know, and databases compared to then, compared to now, just you cannot compare them. Today, they're just so much different. Networking, as in computer networking, that is very different. It's, you know, wireless, Wi-Fi is everywhere. Many years ago, it was, you know, dial-up modems, and it was an absolute nightmare. Even the software development techniques now are far more advanced. I mean, my first programming language was BASIC and assembler. Then I worked on COBOL and Fortran and stuff like that. And it was hard work to develop of anything of any use. And the development techniques were just not very helpful in developing techniques. And now a lot of the software technology development protocols are very much far more advanced. You know, I mean, you have WYSIWYG and GUIs and all sorts of stuff, even down to some of the rule-based stuff now, which is actually, compared to what it used to be, is light years ahead. And hardware improvements. I mean, won't state the obvious. I think somebody said the mobile phone, which I've got, which itself is pretty out of date, had more processing power than the Apollo 12 or Apollo 11 that went to the moon. But now hardware improvements are massive. I do remember when I was a youngster, when I first started out in the 80s, we had a 16 gigabyte disk space, and I remember thinking we'd never ever fill that up with anything. But now that it's like one song of a Pink Floyd album, you know. So, and there's many other new technologies coming at the time. And what you find with technology is that they become very emerged, they become very mainstream quickly. And so, you know, technology is a gradual advancing subject. In the same way as the new technologies, there are new uses of technology. As I mentioned earlier, you know, sort of reiterate the previous slide in a certain way. You know, people using social media. Originally, social media was there just to keep in contact with people, but now it's a massive industry in data usage and trying to sell people, advertising, and what have you. social media, using social media, again, an example, it's increased usage. There's very few people who don't use some sort of social media, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, that sort of stuff like that. And life now is we're very reliant on technology. I mean, you wouldn't believe the meltdown I had the other day when our internet failed and my two daughters couldn't get onto YouTube or something. You thought the world was going to end. But while that's a sort of a slightly jolly thing, and I found it hilariously funny, although they didn't, it's very much along the lines of how reliant we're on technology, and also 24/7 access. People want everything when they want it. They want to dial on at 1 minute to midnight on New Year's Eve to check their bank account statement. In the old days that wasn't possible, but now with the new technologies and the new usages, that's possible. And these new uses of technology again become the norm quite quickly. I do remember when having the ability to do online banking 24/7 was deemed as like, wow, this is fantastic. But now it's just the norm. But the challenges you have now with these new technologies and new usages, you bring up a number of new issues and challenges, and it's almost a case of you create lots and lots of benefits and good points, but in the reaction, a sort of negative point, you create lots of problems. We're completely reliant on technology in certain areas, and then that story I gave you about my daughters going to meltdown when the internet was down. It's I was fortunate I wasn't working, because I don't know what I've been doing, working from home without the internet. I would have been able to work. I'm completely reliant on it. Cyber risks, and read all these horror stories about Talk lost all their accounts, and all this data encryption and all stuff like that. I mean, as well as cyber risks, you've got lots of legislations. And the also other thing is around social issues. People tend to forget about the social impact on technology. I mean, from one extreme, there's always a reluctance with new technologies. Like my dad, and he's gone now, but when he was alive, it took him 30 years to use a hole in the wall machine because he was very nervous about using it. Employment issues, one extreme, if you're in a technology group, there's always a chance the technology you're using, if it gets replaced by an emerging technology, you lose your job. You might be able to retrain, but you might not be able to retrain. It also creates new jobs in industries. For example, internet banking creates a lot of new but behind the scenes jobs, but change the actual makeup of the workforce. New skills, again, and complexity and risk. And I mentioned cyber risk earlier, but now with all these new technologies, which I'll come to in a bit later on, and some of the challenges, is that it's all very much along the lines of, you've got lots of data components, software components working together, you've got new skill sets, you've got people working on it, you've got processes. So you've got this absolute mess or net of items. So therefore, bear in note, sort of the last 5 or 10 minutes I was speaking about there, bear that in mind, and think about what is a new emerging technology. So I think without staying the same, it's a relatively new technology, hence the emerging bit, otherwise it wouldn't be the new technology. But I think it needs to have a record of being used. That's what I think. So some of these emerging technologies have to be used, as opposed to a technology that is in the research, or to quote what Microsoft used to do, vaporware stage. So it needs to have some sort of like program record. But although it's mainstream, or its rollout may not be mainstream, so it may have some dedicated users, you may have some organizations and firms that are trying to push it to make it a little bit pushing, but it's not actually fully mainstream. And also the other thing about the new emerging technology, and the other thing to mention, it needs to provide some sort of benefit to society. It needs to improve people's lives, provide a business benefit, etc., etc. And those items there, a social benefit, a financial benefit, or a usage benefit. So therefore, we've defined what an emerging technology trend is. So I said before, it's a relatively new technology that has some take up in the real world, and also obviously provides some real benefit to the outside world. So before we go on to item 3, which is the tips for some successful implemented technology, I think I'll run through some examples, because what you find is when I talk through some of the examples, there's a number of challenges one has when implementing these two new technologies, and hopefully that will then feed item 3 below. So I've listed a number of new technologies, and some of them are more trends in technology in the current context. I think it illustrates the ability between having the technology and the social impact and the real world impact. So the first one is remote working. Obviously, the first right, I mean, without stating complete obvious, it's the ability to work remote as part of your normal work. In the good old days, the only people who used to dial in from work were people who used to do overnight support on a dial-up modem that took 6 hours to log on, and it was actually quicker to drive into work than actually do it remotely. But nowadays, with internet connectivity and laptops and Wi-Fi and all stuff, get good stuff, it's a lot easier to do. So this has actually all been driven by probably obviously COVID-19 became a big issue. Well, it's a very serious issue, to be honest with you. And obviously, people had to move to remote working almost overnight in some cases. But I think now there's a very social issue around which this trend supports, is a better work-life balance. A lot of people don't want to work full-time in London or Manchester or Leeds, or Edinburgh, Scotland, or wherever, New York. They want the ability to spend a couple of days at home with their family and work life. And I think that my personal view is, well, you asked me 2 years ago, I would never work from home. I thought it was just a way to skive off. But I think over the last couple of years with COVID-19, I've completely U-turned like a Tory MP. And now I think that the remote work is a good idea. But there's lots of challenges. I mean, for example, you're reliant on staff infrastructure, i.e. you're often your own laptop, your own internet connection, ensuring that your own laptop has your own security patches. For example, your Wi-Fi is encrypted and all sorts of stuff like that. So obviously it opens a massive risk to firms, cyber risk. There's lots of internal infrastructure to support. So, a lot of the firms I worked with during the lockdown, fortunately, had remote access. But the problem with it, a lot of firms didn't. So they had to immediately install remote access, Citrix servers or Teams sites or what have you, at short notice. Lots of policies and security policies had to be put in place. In some cases, staff contracts had to be enhanced to say, thou shalt not download stuff and leave it on the train when you go back to work. And also the other thing is around staff well-being. While obviously I prefer like working from home, some people don't. People live on their own, they actually might enjoy the social contact of work. And IT systems and people need to support remote working. In the old days, if your laptop didn't work, you tended to walk it to the help desk or give them a ring. But now you may have to try and do it remotely over the telephone or internet connection because you're based out in deepest Essex and your office is in deepest London. And also another good thing is around enhanced BCP. One of the biggest problems when I worked in financial services was a lot of firms had one big office in London where all their operations were done. If that office was out of action because of a power cut or a terrorist bomb, the company was knackered. So nowadays, having remote working, you have people spread around the world, which reduces the reliance on the single office. And I've got removed work in there. That's an error. That should be remote working. Remote working will cost, at least in the short term. So firms who want to do remote working, support their staff, will have to pay money up front to build all this infrastructure and all the other items. Next one is self-servicing. Again, this is another technology trend. And this is quite an interesting one because it links a number of underlying technologies together. I said before, in the good old days back in the 80s and 90s, everything was done face to face or over the telephone. So if you wanted to go to the doctor, you had to ring them up or walk in. If you wanted to open a bank account, you had to fill out 400 forms and go and plead with the bank manager to open it up. But now all this can be done over portals, web portals, apps, NLP, which is the ones further down, natural language processing. You can do it verbally over a telephone or over email, online forms. It's really, really good. I mean, this has obviously been driven by a number of items, increased usage of services and products, the increased complexity. But from a customer's point of view, they want 365 days per year, 24 hours per day access. And they don't want to wait till Monday afternoon to go and talk about a problem with their insurance product or the council tax not being paid. They want to do it now. And I think also COVID-19 has helped drive that as well. I think the challenges around self-servicing, again, this is a common theme, is be pragmatic about what can be covered. Normally things like that can be easily codified or business rules can be developed. Any other rules that are quite subjective, it's always a bit nasty. For example, opening a new bank account or transferring ownership of a council tax from one account to another can be done online. But if you're trying to talk about sorting out somebody's will or somebody's probate, you may want to try and do that with a human voice. It's reliant on clean and accurate data. You know, if you get data wrong on a client, it's the end of the world. Security is really important. Comes back to one of the hints and tips later on, relates to cyber security. So security needs to be built in from the start. And likewise, BCP, you know, there's no point having the self-servicing when 90% of your clients or your customers or use your website or your apps, and there's no backup if the website crashes. You know, I mean, otherwise you'll be out of business in about 24 hours. And this also changes the usability. You want a front end that you can use. The last thing you want to do is have some real clunky thing that's impossible to use. And then you also need to link it to your back end systems. Some of these back end systems could be ancient technology, and you need to ensure that it's all seamless, and it's an absolute real challenge. And also you need a support model in place. Machine learning, and this is another, and there's often sometimes called deep learning, and I think management science, sorry, computer scientists love coming up with these great names. I think the first one around machine learning is that, excuse me, it's basically computers trying to learn business rules, patterns, understanding reasons by using data. And you typically, for machine learning, you have supervised or unsupervised. So supervised machine learning is where you would provide some data and you know the result. For example, a client I worked with, actually, they were an online trader. They wanted to work out what time of the day was the most profitable time to trade. So they were pumping loads of trading data on trades that were profitable and trades that were unprofitable. I knew the result. And then they would use machine learning tools to try and work out, you know, what scenarios are good for profitable trading, you know, trade in the morning or trade in the afternoon. The other one is unsupervised learning, where basically just pump lots of data in and it comes up with all sorts of patterns and links across the data. It's actually quite interesting. Some of the links that came out was, I must admit, when I first started working on this, I read a case study in America, I think it was, that they pumped loads of data in about customers, and there was purchasing habits, and they found out customers who spend more time on the telephone actually buy more ice cream. So a lot of these people were trying to work out, why is the telephone and ice cream got linked together? But the actual link it was actually disposable income. It was like a sort of like a incorrect link. And I said, and again, machine learning is driven by understanding patterns and correlations between it, and this sort of like understanding decision making will actually help with servicing better products. You know, again, working with financial services firms, again, they use a lot of machine learning to try and understand how customers buy their products, what customers buy, what types of products, why they don't buy it, so they can understand which products to sell to which customer segments. And again, a number of challenges there. You know, again, a lot of machine learning. You need to have a clear business reason on why you should have machine learning. It's bloody expensive, to put it bluntly, and a lot of hard work. So you really need to have a clear business reason. For example, is to increase costs? Is it to increase customer revenue or reduce costs? Also, with machine learning, it can be quite overwhelming. So normally it's best to start with a small pilot study, maybe pick some very simple bit of analysis you want to learn and build out of it. There's also handing over control to the computer. Sort of sounds like 2001: The Space Odyssey, for those who remember that. You are throwing away, or you're giving a lot of control to algorithms that are generated automatically by the computer. And there's a challenge. You may not understand what the actual algorithms are actually doing when you get into them. So you end up with like a black box scenario. And the challenge with that is that people get nervous of it. And I remember going back to that trading scenario I mentioned earlier, we sat down with some of my clients to say, well, this is a fantastic thing we're doing with machine learning, and we can make your trading really, really, really more efficient and make you lots more money. And they said, well, basically, how does the black box work? And because the machine learning was so complicated, no one really understood it. So the client wasn't very happy. And so they were very nervous about handing over something that no one really understood the detail with. Again, yeah, it needs timed and accurate data. That goes without saying. You need to make sure the models work. Again, say that obvious. You have new skills and capabilities. You know, machine learning if I had £100 for everybody told me they were a data scientist and all they were actually really were doing is writing SQL queries, I'd be a very rich man. So basically, machine learning is a very dedicated skill, really understanding data. You need clear governance in place. What do you do? How do you ensure everything's working? How do you test it? And many other things like that. RPA, another one, robotic process automation, I think it stands for. And it's a using a piece of software program to imitate the process that a person would do. In effect, I think my old boss once called it workflow on the cheap, where one will basically create some scripts that will actually simulate somebody keying data in or doing some sort of process on it. The drivers for it's very easy to, much easier than a full workflow implementation. I wouldn't say it's easy at all. It's easier than a full workflows implementation. And it proves automation. And in fact, we're actually, where I'm working at the moment, we're doing some RPA on some spreadsheet reconciliations. We're doing some testing, and we have to reconcile about 5 systems every day, and we get 5 extracts off the systems. And we've written a few RPA scripts to download or upload the systems into an Excel spreadsheet and run some various checks and sorts on it to produce the reports. It took a little while, to be honest with you, to get it working, and we had a few complete and utter disasters, to be honest with you. But once it's got working, we can run all the reconciliation reports in about 5 minutes, where previously it was taking about 2 hours. I think on RPA is, again, people think it's because it's like workflow done, let's say on the cheap. That's very patronizing. I think workflow done quicker. Don't underestimate the effort required. It is still not an easy thing to do. You need lots of things. Have a clear business case. So this is another key theme. Again, why are you doing RPA? You're doing it to improve automation, as in you can reduce staff. Are you doing it to automate stuff to reduce risk? Or are you just automating it because you think it's a good idea? And on those things. Again, another item there, which is when we get onto the 11 key themes, is implement slowly and wrap up gradually. These things aren't a 5-minute implementation. You can easily make a complete pig's breakfast of it. So pick a few simple tasks you want to automate using RPA, like we're doing at my current place with spreadsheets, and then gradually ramp up. And you've got to learn how it works. And beware of creating spaghetti. For any of those who've worked on spreadsheets for many years, you end up with spreadsheets that are so complicated you need a PhD in Excel to try and understand it. So if you're going to overlay that with some RPA scripts, it's going to be an absolute chaos. So therefore, be careful of having controls in place. And last but not least, build skills and capabilities. If you're going to invest in an RPA scripting software and you're going to have a lot of your business relying on it, make sure you've got the right skills and capabilities in place. The other, sorry, I'm just losing my voice here, too much talking. Internet of Things, which is another new technology that's always bouncing around. Again, it's another one that sort of like gets lots of noise and lots of thing. But basically, what it is, thing is adding any object to the internet, whether that or anything, and that thing, hence the Internet of Things, could be a photocopier, a sensor, a wearable, a television. And you see sometimes these footballers nowadays are all walking around with these bra type things on, which are full of like sensors and everything to monitor the health of the footballers and what have you. The drivers, really is around to improve automation. And operational efficiency and collection of timely data. Again, one of the areas I worked on many months ago related to putting connectors on to monitor traffic movements. And one of the things that came out was, we could monitor cars going through various junctions, stopping at traffic lights, going over roundabouts, and suddenly you create an absolute massive amount of data on when people move and when people drive and everything. And what it allowed the local council to do was actually to almost like change the patterns of the traffic lights to basically improve the efficiency of press the wrong button there, improve the efficiency of the roads, which is actually quite good actually. So again, on the Internet of Things to think about is, again, this is a common theme, and when we go through the 11 points later on, it's excuse me, need a clear business reason. You know, why are you doing this? Why are you going to be sticking sensors on traffic lights? Why are you going to be asking, you know, the Man City football team to put a sensor in their shirt and stuff like that? What's the reason? You're trying to improve efficiency, increase revenue, etc. Again, always start small and grow gradually. These technologies sound great, they sound glamorous, but they're very hard to implement. You also need to build internal skills and capabilities. You know, you need to understand how the Internet of Things works, all the various technologies, etc. Security is also essential. You probably have cyber security and physical security. So as well as cyber security, you want to make sure that any data you collect on the sensor, for example, is encrypted and not stolen and not misused. You always want physical security as well, because the last thing you want to do is put some sensor on top of a let's say a telephone pole, something like that. Some little chap goes and steals it, or smashes it up, or nicks it, or sells it, or takes it and tries to sell it back to you on eBay or something like that. The next one is social acceptance issues. And this is a common theme for a lot of emerging technologies. People are always worried about Big Brother. And for those who remember the book 1984, I did my O-levels many years ago. There's a lot of social acceptance. People are very nervous about new technology. They're worried about, you know, if they have to put a sensor on, why are people monitoring me? What are they trying to do? Power supply dependence, which is sorry, I'm just moving. Is a power. It's basically if you've got something on the top of a telephone pole, and you want to make sure it's got enough power to last. Otherwise, you'll be going up and down that telepole every 20 minutes, trying to change the batteries. Remote maintenance, again, feeding on the other point. If you've got remote sensors in cars, or you've got a remote sensor on I don't know, an airport or something like that, and it goes wrong, how do you get to it? You know, you need to have people who can access it reasonably quickly and get access to it. And last but not least, you need network dependency. Again, you know, you mentioned before, we're very reliant on the internet and Wi-Fi and all 5G, 4G, and whatever, 3G, depending where you're on the train. You need the ability for Internet on Things to be able to connect to the internet. Right, it's moving down. And NLP, which is natural language in processing, not neurolingual programming, which is something to do with people, but natural language processing. And this is trying to understand human communication from various sources, and inbound and outbound. So at one extreme would be the ability for a computer to listen to what you're saying, and then to interpret what you're saying into some codified system, and then use that to do something with it. And that inbound, as well as being human speaking, could be a written word, it could be an email, it could be a text message or a WhatsApp message. So you can think lots of ways, any communication that comes in. Outbound is the same, but in reverse. So, you know, it's ability that the system is going to send something over to you, output maybe say a report or a message, and it can actually speak to you over a medium, or write you some email or a letter. And this is actually a very popular moment these days, and you know, and a lot of firms, you have like and they want to use it because it gives good customer servicing. So it comes back to the top second item there. You get 24/7 customer servicing, and it's scalable. You know, you don't need a call center the size of Hampden Park with thousands of people in to cover your busiest time of the year. You can build a very secure and scalable computer technology architecture with the cover of everything, which obviously creates operational efficiencies as well, or in other words, makes things cheaper to run. But the key thing, also the other thing, it gives you good data collection as well, because everything's coming in, it's been going through some sort of like set of rules to sort of like effectively standardize the data inbound, and you've got good ideas on what queries are coming in, what customers are asking for, what are their complaints, when they're calling, when they're not calling. Again, clear business reason. The challenges, again, same thing. You probably, time I get down to green computing, you'll be thinking, why do you keep on saying this? But you have to have a clear reason why you're doing it. Are you doing it to improve customer servicing? Are you doing it to try and because all your competitors need to do it? Are you doing it for legal reasons? I mean, there's no right or wrong way, but there's just, you need to make sure you've got the right one. Choose your usage wisely. There is, as I said before, is a lot of these NLPs very good for things that are very codified and easily defined, like provide my account balance, please shut my account, please send me a new bank statement, please tell me where please update my council tax bill. Very easy stuff, very easy codified. Obviously, once you understand what people are saying. Other areas about which are a bit more harder to codify, like dealing with a death, dealing with a major complaint, or some very complex transaction or activity. Don't bother. Just get people on the end of the line to do that. Again, implement and ramp up gradually. Again, I won't go over that again. I've mentioned it on all the others. Implement a robust infrastructure. Again, if you're relying in the same way as self-servicing, because these link to self-servicing to a certain extent, if you're relying on a sort of like a computer to listen, if you want, and to speak to all your customers, you want to make sure that doesn't go crash down, because if you've got hundreds of thousands of customers and they can't get through because your NLP website application's gone down, you're going to be on the front page of the Daily Mail. Which are probably good for the Tory parties, give them a rest, but not good for your business. So make sure you've got backups in place, and backups of backups and backups of backups of backups. Most of the issues to do actually around with inbound communications, as you probably, if you just listen to some of the accents when we were chatting before you all guys come on, you got a guy from West Yorkshire, a couple of guys from London, and a couple of guys from and David from Liverpool. So you got everybody all speaking English, but they've got very widely different accents. So you need to ensure that you talk and cope with different accents, and especially in the UK, you've got some very strong regional accents. Northern Ireland, the northeast of England, the west coast of Scotland as well. Also, you need to have sufficient vocabulary and lexicons. And lexicons is basically phrases. You need to ensure the computers understand to pick up certain phrases. For example, please give me my balance. What is my balance? I need to understand my balance. There are 3 phrases for the same thing. So it's important that this does. So it basically means even though when you go live, you need to complete and enhance in the lexicons and the vocabulary. And last one, but not least on this one, is social acceptance. Lots and lots of people are very nervous about speaking to a machine, and including me. Very often you will get things coming up. And I say speaking to a machine, you could even have one of those chat boxes, because that's still obviously NLP, and people just don't want to do it. I do it myself. I bank with HSBC, so I'll be online and it'll come up with a query. You're thinking, I'm not typing it into a machine. I want to speak to a person. So I hunt around the website looking for the contact us page and find it. Which they obviously make very hard to find because they want me to use their little chat box. So again, when you roll this stuff out, you have to be wary that some people, no matter how much you ask them and how much benefit they get out of it, they want to speak to a human person. Moving on, whoops. But cloud computing. So cloud computing and big data are, they are one, you can argue they're not particularly new emerging technologies, but I'll put them in because they are being rolled out. So cloud computing, there's lots of discussion on this. On-demand computing resource covering data storage and power, computing on a tap, computing as a service, software as a service. There's a lots of different ways. And the whole idea around the logic, originally going back many years, was the idea instead of buying thousands of pounds worth of IBM hardware or HP servers, you don't have that. You put everything in the cloud and you use what you pay for, which is in theory a fantastic idea. And it moves a fixed cost model from a very large expensive data center to a variable cost model where you basically pay for what you use, in the same way with electricity and water and gas, etc. And also a lot of software providers, especially in financial services where I work, are actually moving their products to the cloud anyway. So even if you don't want to move to the cloud, you're moving to the cloud. Challenges, there's lots of challenges around here. I think the one thing, again, key point always, Why are you doing this? What's the business reason? Is it because your suppliers are moving onto the cloud? You have no reason, you have no idea, you have no other option but to move to the cloud? Is it because you really think you can move away from a fixed data model to a variable model? Do you think the cloud will offer much more services? You know, I mean, you can have a lot more services. You know, you subscribe to AWS, which is the web services one from Amazon, for those who don't know, and there's lots of widgets and other services you can pick up. The other thing is to think about the end state. Many months ago, many years ago, actually, I worked with a vendor who was trying to move all their trading software and their architecture to the cloud. And in theory, they wanted to pick everything up, move it to the cloud, and carry on, and pat themselves on the back and say, "We've saved the company millions of pounds per year. Give me a bonus." But when I got into the detail, I hit one technical issue and one legal issue. The first one was, at the time, the cloud software the cloud provider they wanted to move to couldn't support the software they wanted to move across. So they ended up some of it on the cloud and some of it still running on their own data center, which suddenly basically meant while you had some of the cost savings, you still had to maintain the data center and all the overheads and the costs and the processes with it. But the second issue that came out, which is funny, actually caught me out, I didn't really think about it, was when they went to some of the software vendors saying, "We are now looking to move your data to the cloud. We're going to now redeploy your trading software that we bought off of you to the cloud." They said, "No, you can't do that." They basically then pointed out that in the software license, they only allowed the software to be run on effectively in-house data centers. So basically, because the vendor, I guess, was nervous that it would go onto the cloud, somebody steal it, replicate it, and then undercut them. So basically, that was when I left the company. Nothing to do with me. I left the company. They were still arguing that debate, and I think they managed to get around the legal issues, because normally, when they said, "I don't want you to move the software to the cloud," they actually mean, "I want you to pay me more money so you can move it to the cloud." So moving down there, choose the provider very carefully. There's hundreds of cloud providers out there, and they all sound absolutely wonderful. But again, it's really understanding what the business reason is, then you can determine what the provider is. Normally, when I pick a supplier, I look it through 4 lenses. The first one is a functional fit, i.e., can they do what you need? You're unlikely to get 100% of everything, but you just need to take a sort of like a risk-based, pragmatic view. The second option is around sort of like commercials and what have you. Are you happy that the costs are fine? If there's any legal issues around liability and data loss, are they happy to look after that? The third one is how quickly they can onboard you. You know, it might be a very good service, but because what you're trying to onboard could actually be quite fiddly, it could take several months. Or the other hand, it could be quite quickly. It could be done over a couple of weekends, if that. And the last one, which I call cultural fit. You know, if you're going to have to work with these cloud provider, ultimately, if you move everything onto a cloud provider, then you're stuck with them. If there's a cultural mismatch, you know, like you're a big firm and they're a large firm, and and you basically can't stand working with them, you're often a bad start. So make sure you think about your cultural fit. Secondly, understand where your data is being stored. The theory behind the cloud, obviously, you put it on the cloud and the cloud provider spreads it all around the world and everything's secure. Obviously, with local data protection laws and obviously the situation in China, in Ukraine and Russia, you've got to be careful where your data is being stored. You don't want it to be taken to a country and then get stolen. Security of data in the cloud, obviously you want it to be encrypted, you want it to be siloed away from other people. Again, if you do your due diligence correctly, that should be fine. Make sure there's sufficient governance over the cloud arrangements. You know, what happens if things go wrong, what checks the provider does around security, how much comfortable are you that the provider's doing what you want them to do. Make sure you internally have skilled staff and capabilities. Again, moving stuff from the cloud, say from a AS400 or a Unix server, moving it into a cloud environment, it's different skill sets, and different understandings of how things work. So make sure you recruit staff, or you ideally retrain and recruit staff in the right skills. Migrate in a gradual manner, and again, this is a common theme that comes across, is unlikely to move everything in one big bang. If you can, you're very brave on the side of being suicidal. Move stuff across, do a pilot study, move a piece of software across, get it bedded in, understand how the cloud works, understand how the migration works, and then you can gradually move everything across. And the penultimate one comes down to people are nervous about data being stored in the cloud. So that comes back to sort of like the social contract, or the fact that people are nervous about new technology. As I mentioned earlier, people worried about machine learning tools telling them what to do, or having an Internet of Things scanner or a sensor in their back pocket. People are nervous about the cloud. They hear these horror stories in the press where data was stolen, or they're worried about a hacker in Russia. Apologies to any Russians on the phone, or a hacker in London stealing all the data. So you have to be very careful. And also regulators are now taking a real interest. As a reason why I call it an emerging technology, you can say that cloud computing is becoming more and more common, particularly for some of the more easier tasks like email and data storage and sort of like like Teamsy type stuff. I mean, again, I work in financial services, and the UK regulator and the European regulators are implementing specific cloud regulation to say if you're storing data in the cloud, then you need to have these provisions in place. So they are now getting worried about it. So as well as obviously the overheads of the cost of moving to the cloud and all the new skills and all the complexity, you've also got a regulator on your backside asking you make sure you're doing everything. And on the big data, again, this is a fantastic phrase that's been bounced around, one of my favorite subjects, to be honest with you. I mean, again, what is big data? Obviously, clues in the name, I guess. There's a large amount of data. I mean, billions and trillions of data items and data points, which is constantly changing at a rapid pace. And it could be weather patterns, social media posts, market movements in the financial services, traffic movements in London and stuff like that. And the data is often stored across different formats. So, you could get stuff coming in like nicely structured XML, which is a data person's dream, or it come through in emails, it could come through on messages, it could come from an Internet of Things sense, or it could come through a natural language processing message or a verb or something like that. So it's lots of data constantly changing different formats. And what it is that people, I mean, data is king. I mean, in financial services, they say data is the blood of the industry. And basically what people want to do is get lots and lots of data on it, and they can use techniques like machine learning to analyze the data to understand historic behavior, build algorithms to predict future events and behaviors, and ultimately change future behaviors. There's an interesting point that, because a lot of people will think, well, changing future behaviors, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, I think it depends what behavior they're changing. I mean, if somebody was to try and change my behaviors to make me eat more healthier and lose 3 stone in weight, I would think it's a good idea. But if somebody was trying to change my behaviours to make me vote Tory or Labour or Lib Dem, I think that's a bad idea. So again, you just have to be careful there. Challenges, clear business reason. I won't go over that again. I've done it 11 times at least. Clean and accurate, timely data. It goes with the name. Again, if you're collecting data, start small, ramp up gradually. Again, this is a key thing. Build an infrastructure. Again, if you're going to be collecting millions of data items a day, a second, or even a minute, which is constantly changing across different formats, you need a pretty powerful infrastructure to ensure that data is gathered, cleaned, scrubbed, maintained, stored, and make sure that's done. You need skilled staff and capabilities. I mean, I think I mentioned earlier on the talk, if I had 100 quid for everybody who told me they were a big data scientist or a data scientist, I'll be out to buy Man City. I mean, remember, you make sure when you do it, you need people who really understand data modeling, the data science, how data works, especially using big data with machine learning techniques to analyze the data, or big data which is being fed by Internet of Things or natural language processing. You really need skillful staff at this to really think about what you need, and don't underestimate the effort required. Data privacy and security. Again, I mean, it's very similar to what I said on the cloud, really. If you've got data and you're storing it, you may need to, GDPR and the one in California data privacy, I can't remember the name. They're very strict rules on keeping data, how long you keep it, what you use it for. the last thing you want to do is get yourself in trouble for misuse of data. So really understand how the data is secured and everything. Governance and control. Again, if you're using a massive amount of data coming in, which you're going to use to run your business, make decisions, try and predict customer behaviors, even trying to change customer behaviors, you need to make sure you've got controls in place around that to make sure it all works. And if it doesn't work, you can actually fix it quick. And the other one, the penultimate one, is dark side and social acceptance. Again, it's sort of changing future behaviors. Again, it comes around to all these new technologies are wonderful, but people are nervous. There's lots of bad press stories about the Trump administration and Brexit. Whether they're true or not, one doesn't know. Where they use big data techniques to try and manipulate people to change their voting intentions. So people hear the word big data and it's like, oh, don't like that. So you will have a social acceptance issue. So you need to manage that as part of the implementation. And also the other thing is, again, this comes from back to that scenario, that example I gave you about the telephone bills and the amount of ice cream people buy and eat. Does the analysis actually sound sensible? I mean, if you come up with some bizarre analysis, it's a case of sitting back and thinking, does it sound proper? I mean, it may well be. It may well be. I mean, one of the things about these big data with machine learning type of analysis is that you can come up with some fantastic insights that were just totally left field that you never thought about. And last but not least, moving on to green computing. I think while this isn't a technology, emerging technology, it's a technology trend. I think in a strange way, if you read the book, I think I'll probably put this down as probably the most important technology trend at the moment. I think all of you are aware, despite what our Parliament trying to convince us, there's a massive issue with climate change. I mean, I'm in my 50s, and England anyway seems a lot warmer in the summer and a lot colder and wetter in the winter than it was when I was growing up. And I don't think that's not a perception. I think that's really what's happening. So basically, computers generate an unbelievable amount of heat, and obviously things like metal and all sorts of weird stuff that was produced in it. So really, we just need to make sure technology is greener, and which is the main driver is climate change. And it's a slight contradiction there, because all these new emerging technologies, cloud, big data, and all of these, they use massive processing power, which generates more heat, which actually sort of goes against it. So challenges around, you need to benchmark your greenness. Basically, how green are you? Are you comparing? There's various benchmarks out there to say around sort of like whether you're producing too much heat or too little heat. You need to benchmark yourself against that, and then create some sort of strategy to basically reduce your carbon footprint or your computer footprint. And it often, people tend to think about the big items like trying to reduce the heat in data centers and all sorts of stuff like that. But there's a lot of small changes you can be done. You can have laptops. Make sure I move my mouse so my laptop doesn't lock. But your laptop gets locked. Your printers, turn them off at night. Using virtual disk storage or virtual machines to reduce the number of laptops you need, or your data storage. Can you have data storage that's greener? Printing volumes, don't print stuff out, or recycle stuff. And also, as well as these things, work with your suppliers and customers to get them to be green as well. I've worked at one client who actually one of their key sort of like a criteria to onboard a new supplier and a client was for both of them to prove how green they were. And if they weren't green, they would not touch them. And I thought it was a little bit of a sort of like trying to play the greenwashing, but they were completely 100% really into it. Remember, it's not cheap. None of this stuff is cheap, unfortunately, and it will take time. If you've got to migrate everything into sort of like virtual technologies, Citrix and stuff like that, that will take time, especially if you've got to test apps and all sorts of stuff like that. And I think greenness can be used as a selling point. A lot of customers and suppliers, what I do, will often say they will green and come to us with a greenest supplier in the world type thing. And it's a selling point as well. Obviously, you have to be a little bit skeptical. They're trying to greenwash everything to give the impression they're more greener than they are. And the new technologies require a large amount of processing power, which I sort of touched on earlier. So there's a big contradiction here. These new technologies, which are all wonderful, although they have their challenges, are probably, in a strange way, generating much more heat than their predecessors. Okay, so what I've done there in the last, I suppose, about 40 odd minutes, I'm trying to get my laptop to rehearse. I went through what the emerging technology trend is, and then, which is obviously a newer technology that's providing some sort of benefit to life, but it's not completely mainstream yet. I went through about 9 examples of the technologies, and I think the probably to sort of move into the crux of the presentation now is to run through the tips for implementing technology successfully. Implementing emerging technologies successfully. I think the point to mention is, as I went through some of those challenges earlier, hopefully you would have realised that implementing a new technology or an emerging technology has many similar let's say themes than implementing an old technology system. You still need to have a clear business reason. You still need to have the right skills in place. You need to implement the technology gradually and with some sort of like risk averse approach and so on. But there are a few extra hints and tips that can be taken into account for the newer technologies. And there are a total of 11, hence the presentation's name. So basically, I've put them across the top, and apologies for some reason, some of the formatting has gone a bit weird actually. So, and I work my way from the left to the right, being very sequential. So the first one is and I mentioned it a few times before, a firm must have a clear business reason to implement technology. For example, is it growth? You're trying to grow your business. The technology will help you grow your business. It will make sure you just, at worst, keep up with your competition. Is it there to support legal changes? I know in financial services particularly, there's obviously since the credit crunch where financial services nearly completely destroyed the world, there's been an absolutely tsunami of regulation coming in, and some of it is massively complicated. And people have implemented some of the new emerging technologies around, especially around sort of like machine learning and RPA and big data to try and manage the regulatory changes. And also another thing is people put new emerging technologies is protection from new entrants. So the key point to mention is why often firms will have a technologies department and stuff like that, is that these emerging technology implementations need to be viewed as a large strategic change, and as any other change, and would need to be treated with the same amount of respect. So in the same way a firm might open a new office, say in mainland Europe, and there's a lot of attention from the senior members and money, and these new emerging technologies need the same sort of respect, and not something that should be isolated within the technology department. And the key thing is you don't implement technology for the sake of technology. You implement technology to fulfill a business reason. The next one is also I mentioned a few times, slow and steady, what have you. There is a tendency to try and implement new technology. You go to a webinar, you go to a sales pitch, and they explain to you how wonderful RPA, robotic process automation, is, and how easy it is to implement, and you should be able to do it within hours. But that's not the case. I think there's always problems. You've got to learn the technology, you've got to learn the skills, and it's very easy to get carried away with technology. So I think like any emerging technology, especially if they're not mainstream and not everybody's used them, and there's still not a massive amount of uses around, you need to take these as a gradually regular review points. It's like do a pilot study, then review the pilot study, do an initial implementation, then review that, and so on. And it allows the firms to understand the technology, because all these technologies have their own personalities, as well as build confidence in the technology and momentum, and also, more importantly, some sort of return on investment with senior management. Because the last thing you want to tell your management, particularly if they're pretty vicious, is that you've spent that big technology project they've actually put money into is not going very well. So it's a lot better to do it slowly, and then build up. Legal and regulatory, apologies, the regulatory in the little orange box has gone a bit screwy. All industries are governed by complex sector regulations. As I mentioned earlier, I primarily work in financial services. I also work in the charity industry as well, and the regulation is massively complicated. So you need to worry about that. While often for some of these newer technologies, specifically the regulation doesn't exist. For example, there's no particular technology about how to maintain machine learning algorithms and what have you. There's also number of existing regulation that does in place that could impact it. For example, GDPR. Anybody who's worked on that will probably know what a wonderful bit of technology or regulation that is that needs to be complied with. So that's data protection legislation. There's also rules around sort of like sustainability in the EU as well, which is around ensuring that recycling of materials and what have you. So and I think also therefore it's important to fully understand the regulatory landscape to ensure it's catered for during implementation. Because otherwise, the last thing we do is implement this new technology and realise you've broken some law and you've got to redo the whole thing again. However, as I mentioned earlier, in specific industries, and again, going back to financial services, which I'm working at the moment, there's a large amount of technology coming in around some of these emerging technologies, in particular around cloud computing. The financial regulators are now putting laws in specifically around cloud computing to say, if you have your parts of your software actually in the cloud, then these 55 regulations you need to comply with. And also other industries have some indirect regulation, again, not harping on about financial services again, but they have a piece of regulation around operational resilience, which is basically saying how resilient is your firm to problems. For example, if you lost your main data center, could the firm carry on? If you lost your main building, could the firm carry on? If 5 key members of staff decided to walk out and not come back, what would happen? So that implies, if you're using, a big data technology or machine learning or a client self-servicing portal that has, sort of like a natural language processing front end and what have you, you need to prove that that's all maintained and sustainable. That you have backup sites in place, sufficient controls in place as well. Whoops. The next one there is cyber risk. Again, without stating the obvious. Technology risk, cyber risk. Cyber risk has been around for years. All sorts of wonderful things like viruses, Trojan horses, phishing, denial of passwords, SQL injection, Jaxbust, and others. But obviously, the more you rely on technology, whether it's in the cloud or what have you, or even in-house, or the cyber risk becomes more and more of an issue. Therefore, when implementing technology, it's important that security measures are designed at the start of the implementation and the design and not added in as an afterthought. I've worked in many places where people have suddenly started testing software, testing apps and everything, and suddenly realize there's no security in place. And it's a case of they try and patch it in or bolt it on the side, but it doesn't work. You end up with lots of problems. As well as cyber risk, there's many other risks. So I mentioned earlier, operational risks, for example. You may have a very old legacy system that you're wrapping around a site client service in front end, and in between putting NLP in place and maybe running it on the cloud. Suddenly you've got massive complex operational risk. Basically you've got software packages all over the place. You've probably got multiple skill sets in place, and it's very complicated, and those risks need to be understood and managed. You could have data risks. We mentioned earlier before, if you've got data in the cloud or you're reliant on data, if it's wrong, it could cause problems. You have legal and regulatory risks, as I mentioned, and sort of that ties up with the third point up there. You need to worry about what you're doing. Does it comply with all the rules? I said before, it does happen. The regulator could close you down, and it does happen, or close bits of you down. Cost risk, you don't really understand. If you've got very complex information or technology infrastructure, you may not have control of the costs, and it could run up and down. And likewise, revenue risk as well. If you don't roll out new technology properly, it could impact your business, and it could cause revenue issues. So therefore, as part of any technology, all these risks must be identified earlier, so they can be managed during implementation. So they aren't sort of like, you don't have this last manic panic as an afterthought at the end to try and manage all these risks. New skills and capabilities. As you implement new technologies or emerging technology, you need new skills. And this is always a tricky one, actually, because you would have, you have people working in a technology team who may be very skilled in certain technologies, but if you're suddenly going to bolt on, move everything to the cloud, or you're going to bolt on an RPA sort of like a set of workflows to automate some simple processes. You need to ensure that the staff who actually will develop and support the technology on the ground, like us techies, understand the technology, understand the skills, can amend it, can enhance it, can actually almost think strategic and can lose it. And the other thing that's also forgotten about, and I do some work with some of my other clients, is to say the senior people in the organisation need to understand the technology as well. It's not just a case of something locked in the back room of technology, the techies and the head of technology or the head of development or the chief investment officer. You want the seniors of the business to understand the technology how they, and because it'll actually allow them to sort of like use and determine how to use the technology going forward. For example, again, I'm just trying to think of a good example like machine learning. Yeah, again, yeah, the concept behind machine learning is simple, but like most things, the devil's in the detail. Yeah, you want the senior people in the firm to fully understand how machine learning works, because they may be able to think of other areas of the business they can use it in. And if you don't really have these technology staff on the ground who understand it, as well as a decent understanding at a senior level, the problem you're going to have is that you're going to be completely reliant on contractors, consultants and vendors, like me, I suppose, to support it, which is obviously good for people like me because I get a living out of it. But ultimately, each firm will want their own staff to be able to run it themselves. Another thing is around the staff will lose their jobs or staff's jobs will change. For example, I mean, it's been an age-old problem years ago. I mean, it's been going on forever. It hasn't really changed with any emerging technology. Is that it may be when technology happens, staff will lose their jobs. For example, if you're going to replace a call center of hundreds of people with a self-servicing portal supported by NLP front ends and back ends and what have you, people are going to lose their jobs, and it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant. I mean, again, unfortunately, many years ago, I did a lot of redundancies and outsourcing and offshoring. I mean, I didn't really know all the individuals, but it was very upsetting, to be honest with you, because you see like the fabric of a firm being pulled apart and people losing their best friends because things are moving on. So therefore, if people as an implementation will be losing their jobs, and it does happen, and there's no way you can dodge it. It's important that the process is as pain-free as possible. And it's never pain; it's always painful. And you want to treat these people as tactfully as you can. I mean, you hear of these brutal things where people are made redundant over the phone or by text message, or it's almost a case of everybody into room A is going to be made redundant, and if you're on the left side of the room, you're fine. So you want to make it so you want to look after these people. These are, these guys have obviously worked for many years for the firms, and you want to make sure they're looked after and give them support. We're looking for new jobs and what have you. And also, there is legislation to be followed. If you're making people redundant, particularly in mainland Europe, where the legislation is far more employee friendly, you need to make sure that the rules are all followed. Again, I've sort of mentioned this a few times. There's when you implement new technology, you need a robust infrastructure, especially if your business is really relying on it now. Again, I used the self-servicing thing before. So therefore, you need production systems, you need backup systems, you need test systems, you need post-go live systems, you need pre-go live systems, you user acceptance, connectivity testing, you need the whole shebang. As well as the infrastructure around the production side, you also need very good development and ongoing support arrangements around, developing changes to the infrastructure, especially if you've got in-house packages, third-party packages in place. Some of them are in the cloud, some of them are not on the cloud, perhaps are on multiple cloud providers. So you've suddenly got a very complex new process in place, or infrastructure in place. So therefore, you need some very good development, testing, and deployment tools to track all that, especially if you have to deploy stuff at short notice, or worse, undeploy it or roll it back at even shorter notice. That means you obviously need good new business processes as well as good oversight and controls. And therefore, as part of the infrastructure, as I said, around the complexity of it, you need ability to monitor. What happens if things go wrong? How do you fix them? And if things go wrong, what do you do? Obviously you need to fix them, but you need to do lessons learned. And do you have to report issues to clients? Do you have to go back to the regulator if things go down? Again, it's not a fight. It's very much saying, these emerging technologies are great, but they do have downsides when they go wrong. And as I mentioned earlier, a couple of slides ago, you need suitable skills and capabilities. And data. Again, all these new emerging technologies are very reliant on data, self-servicing, big data itself, machine learning, NLP, RPA, they all need data. Without data, they're next to useless. And this data needs to be timely, i.e. when it's required. That could be a month end, quarter end, it could be every 3 seconds or every half a second, and it needs to be accurate. So therefore, firms need to understand what data is required, and when they can, and how they can, and where and how they can obtain it. As I mentioned earlier, if you've got a big data thing coming in and you've got 50 or 60 different data feeds coming into your big data analysis, you need to ensure that all 50 turn up. And if one's missing, does that cause a problem in the analysis? Because you've got half the data at one, sort of 49 bits of the data at one stage, and 50 and a 50th, at another stage. So you need to worry about that. And last but not least, you need controls and processes around this to ensure this data is sourced and controlled. If it all goes wrong, what happens? And I think probably one of the biggest challenges on any emerging technology is social acceptance. As I mentioned earlier, some people don't like speaking to a machine. They want to speak to a person. So it basically means things like NLP will be challenging to sell. Nobody wants to speak to it or even email it, or talk to a chat box. Also, people don't like, and like self-servicing, people don't like speaking to a computer, especially an older generation like me. People are very nervous about big data and machine learning, Internet of Things. People are nervous about being monitored. So all these technology has social issues, and this isn't a new thing. If you go back many years, I mentioned my dad. Many years ago, it took about 25 years to use a hole-in-the-wall machine. I don't think it would have ever used online banking. And even me, it took me many months to get comfortable using online banking. The only reason I used it because my local bank became a trendy wine bar, so I had no choice. So therefore, customers, staff, suppliers, and wider society need to be comfortable with the new technology. So therefore, you need to do education. You need to make sure people are aware what you're doing, be open and honest what you're doing with their data, what you're using it for. Because if you have any little bit of nervousness about what's going on, people will just won't use it. So therefore, social acceptance is a very key thing about implementing an emerging new technology. And the last item is that I mentioned, and it's sort of implied, we mentioned earlier on, is all these technologies should not be looked at as isolation. If you're going to do a big data and you're going to get billions of data items coming in all through the day continuously, you may need to put it on the cloud. So those two go together, because you might not be able to find a data center or a cheap data center to do it. If you're doing client servicing, client servicing portal, you will need some sort of like a natural language and processing engine to receive ins and process communications going out. Machine learning by nature needs a large amount of data, so that will need big data, and per earlier it might need the cloud. So basically, why you can look at these emerging technologies as individuals, they're actually all linked together and intertwined. So which obviously increases the complexity and the cost, but it's just the nature of the beast. So therefore, as I mentioned down there, that final bullet point, if they're looking to implement an emerging technology, then they may need to implement other technologies to allow it to work. So almost there now. I hear you cheering at the end of the phone. So we've gone through what an emerging technology is, or an emerging technology trend is. We went through some examples, which then led into the 11 tips for successful implementing technology. I think the key point to mention is a lot of the hints and tips are very more sort of like general change management / implementing technology tips, but there are a number of specific technology tips around emerging technology. So let's move into the wrap up and conclusions. I said before, new emerging technology or technology trends can provide real benefits to organizations. I think that's the same. And that could be the staff. Remote working, for example, is good for staff, or as the case may be. Good for suppliers. You forget about suppliers. They're on it. Customers. Client servicing portals are good for them. Machine learning, all these techniques, while they may be nervous about the social acceptance, is there and okay. and society in general. And I'll probably put green computing under there, which is obviously a key one there. However, without stating complete obvious, they're not always that easy to implement, and they do have some challenges to it, which obviously the 11 items I mentioned earlier on, which will cover that. And the key points there is, remember, one, you need to have a business reason for you doing it. Why are you going to do it? Why are you going to be working 25 hours a day, spending millions of pounds worth of money to implement it? Make sure you understand the staff impacts, the social impacts. New skills may be required, existing skills may not be required. People will almost lose their jobs, or their jobs will change. So you need to think very tactfully about it. It will cost. I mean, none of this stuff's free. I've not met a software firm that does anything for free, and that cost will go up, and it will often impact profitability in the short term. But longer term, it will hopefully make things more cost effective, and make things and improve the cost of profitability going forward. Technology is complex at the best of times, but if you start adding in, moving stuff into the cloud, something not into the cloud because of various reasons, putting in, trying to integrate all this complex technology with back-end systems and what have you, the complexity will go through the roof. And when the complexity goes through the roof, increased risk. So again, you just need to be really cognizant of what you're doing there, and make sure you just don't oversimplify it. And last but not least is regulation and legislation. As I mentioned a few times, I've worked in financial services, and the regulation there is crippling for good reasons. I mean, I think financial services let themselves badly down. But these regulations have to be followed, and there's specific regulations about the new emerging technologies, such as cloud computing. But there's also more generic regulations that can impact it, such as ops resilience, data protection, etc., etc. So again, be wary of those things. Don't get carried away with the technology so much that you forget that you've actually probably breaking every law in the land type thing. Therefore, care is required, which I don't think is an unfair summary where we are at the moment. So anyway, that sort of brings me to the end. So thanks for listening. I overran by about 10 minutes. I do apologise. And obviously, the cover of the book's on the right. My details are there on the left. So I thank you for listening. Thank you for staying with me, and I hope you enjoyed the last an hour and a half as much as I did.
Thanks, Paul. We've got at least one question in the chat from Kitty, and it's, I mean, you sort of mentioned that if you're implementing emerging technology, you might have to introduce other technologies. But this question is more about, she wants to get your thoughts on compatibility and integration issues when implementing emerging technology, because obviously organizations are not going to replace all their software and hardware with emerging technologies. So what are the problems associated with that?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, because certain industries have standard communication protocols, like messaging between two systems. Again, I work in financial services. There's various standard integration methods between it, like for passing trade messages, real time, as well as like technical integration, as well as the business integration. I think the challenge you're going to have is where you're integrating two systems where there isn't an easy way to communicate with each other. So you could end up actually, for example, again, I worked at a retail place many actually a few decades ago, actually, now thinking about it, is that they had a website, and it was quite a snazzy website, and they had their sort of like accounting order system for online orders, and the integration between that was completely bespoke. There was no industry standard messaging. They had to do it themselves, which was fine because it got the website live. But every time they upgraded all the systems, they had to update and rethink the integration. So I think the real challenges you have there is, if there's industry standard integration, certain systems do have that sort of thing. That's quite good, but it is a challenge, to be honest with you. And going back to that client I mentioned earlier on, who's the one that wanted to move everything to the cloud, the challenge they had was just the legal issues, which obviously, like most legal issues, you sign a big check and they often disappear. They had lots of issues of integrating different systems into the cloud and back from the cloud. as well as, apart from the messaging formats and the integration technologies, there was also lag between the cloud and their in-house system, which caused problems as well. So there's no right or wrong way of doing it, really. Each one is, but it is, again, one of these things when you start looking at the technology, it's very easy to get carried away with, oh my God, this is brilliant. You just need to often think back about, the pragmatic challenges around, and integration is one of them. Yeah.
Thank you. If there's any last questions, can you please add them to the chat? And while you're doing that, just take a look. There's a link to Paul's book. And obviously, just to note that there will be a video available eventually for this session, and that we'll email it out to the email used on Eventbrite. I'll just give it a couple of moments, Paul, see if there is any more questions. Yeah. But just to say thank you very much. That was very interesting, and I hope everybody got a lot out of it. If there isn't any more questions, then unless David, you have anything to say, we're going to bring this to a close.
Yeah, let's bring it to a close, and I'll sort out the video very soon. So thanks, everybody.
That's great. Thanks a lot.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Paul. That's been brilliant.
Thanks all.